Okay, I want to talk about how to take 10% of a number and increase it or decrease it. So basically 10%. So what we have here, we're starting off with 200. 200 represents 100%. It's everything right now. That's the original number. So you write down 200 and then call it 100%. Now, to make 10% out of 200, we're basically dividing this by 10. When you divide 200 by 10, what happens is that the zeros cancel out and you're left with 20. So dividing this by 10 gives you 20. 20 represents the 10%, or should I say 20 represents the 10% here. So here's the original 200, and this represents 10%, the 20. Now to increase it, we're going to add them together, and you'll get 220. The 220 is the combination of the 100% and the 10%, which we will call 110%. Okay. All right, next. Let's do 300% increase. So a 300% increase, first we start off with the number 300. After you write the number 300, call that the 100%. 300 represents everything, or 100%. To find out what represents the 10% right here, we're going to divide 300 by 100, by 10, should I say. When you divide 300 by 10, you end up with 30 as an answer. So 30 represents the 10%, or should I say 30 represents 10% here. Now to do an increase, we add them together. We add the 300 and the 30, and you get 330. This is what we call 110%. Okay. Now let's do some decreases. Let's do some decreases. On the 20 with the 10% decrease, I want you to write the 20 again and call that 100%. Again, I want you to write down the 200. I said 20. Write down the 200, call that 100%. Then, since this is 10%, we're going to divide this by 10 and get the answer of 20. The 20 I just wrote here, that is the 10%. So you have the 200, that is the 100%. You have the 20, that's the 10%. Since we're doing a decrease, we're going to subtract these two. 200, when you subtract 20, write 180 right below. This right here represents 90% of the original answer. Again, 100% minus 10% leaves you 90% off, or 90% of. Okay, let's do another decrease. 300 with a 10% decrease. So I want you to write 300 first. Write 300. Then call that 100% on the side right here. Make that 100%. Next, we need to figure out what number is 10% and put it right here. 300 divided by 10 leaves 30. So this 30 is the 10%. Again, that 30 is the 10%. So let's subtract. 300 minus 30 leaves 270. This is what we call 90%, or should I say 10% decrease. Okay, let's do a couple of increases. Let's do a couple of increases. We have 400 right here. This represents 100%. You want to find 10% of that. Well, how do you find 10% of 400? You divide it by 10. So let's divide this by 10. I'll put it over here. Zeros cancel, and we get 40. So this 40 is 10%. Since it's an increase, we're going to add those together, and you're going to get 440, which is representing 110% of the original. Okay, let's do another increase. Let's say 500, and you want to do a 10% increase on 500. First thing I want you to do, guys, is write down 500. After you write down 500, we're going to call that the 100% part. Next, we need the 10% part, and we're going to put it right here. Well, what is the 10% of 500? It'll be 50. And the way that I got the 50 is I took 500 and I divided it by 10, and that's how I got the 10%. So again, this is 10%. And then to increase it, we're going to add them together. And this will give us 550, which represents 110%. So that's your answer. Okay. Lastly, I want to do a couple of decreases for you. We're going to do a 10% decrease right here. So start with the number 400. And we're going to call that 100%. And then we want to find out what is 10%. Well, 10% of 400 is going to be 40. That 40 represents our 10%. Now we want to decrease, so we have to use subtraction. 400 take away 40 is going to leave 360, which represents 90%, or should I say a 10% decrease. It used to be 400, now it's 360. It's decreased, it's just gone down. Okay. The last one. We have 500, which is the original number. So we're going to write down 500 right here and call that 100%. Now, 10% of 500 is going to be the number 50. So that's your 10% right there. That is our 10%. Then we're going to subtract these two. 500 minus 50 leaves 450. And this represents 90%.